May 1940. The world watched in horror. Europe stood on the brink of collapse. Germany's blitzkrieg had devoured Western Europe. France, once a bulwark, crumbled. Great Britain braced for invasion. For America, this was a distant thunder, a nation still scarred by the Great Depression. Unemployment in 1933 had reached a staggering 25%. In 1940, it still hovered above 16%. The average per capita income was two-thirds what it had been a decade earlier. A profound disillusionment following the First World War had shaped American policy for 2 decades. Progressive Democrats and isolationist sentiment championed a severely underdeveloped defense budget. Its defense industry was moribund. The specter of the merchants of death, a narrative born from WWII investigations that demonized arms manufacturers, actively discouraged American companies from investing in defense production. Laws like the Neutrality Acts of 1935 and 1936 prohibited war equipment sales to belligerents, further cementing this isolation. This was not a nation inherently prepared for war. Its military was woefully inadequate. War games saw soldiers training with wooden guns. Good humor ice cream trucks served as decoy tanks. Its armored force lacked even basic components like reliable nuts and bolts for its few tanks. The U.S. steel industry in 1939 operated at its lowest capacity in 20 years. Aluminum production for warplanes was less than a quarter of what would be needed. Then, on May 10, 1940, the German invasion of Holland and Belgium began. This ended the phony war. It shattered any illusions of European stability. 4 days later, on May 14, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud delivered a devastating message to Winston Churchill: "We are beaten." Churchill, in turn, dispatched an urgent telegram to President Roosevelt. The imminent collapse of Allied defenses was clear. The dire consequences for American security, if it failed to act, were undeniable. That same day, in a pivotal White House meeting, General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, presented a stark assessment of America's military weakness. His impassioned plea for industrial mobilization provided Roosevelt with critical justification. It set a new direction. This moment, not Pearl Harbor over a year later, was the true awakening for the sleeping giant of American industry. The notion that Pearl Harbor alone roused the United States is a simplification. The foundation for America's industrial readiness was laid in response to the escalating crisis in Europe. On May 15th, President Roosevelt called for an appropriation of $700 million for the Army. He planned for the production of 50,000 military and naval planes. It was an audacious, almost impossible target. A few days later, on May 18th, he summoned American airplane executives to the White House. The era of reluctant engagement was ending. On May 23rd, Roosevelt consulted Bernard Baruch, the financier who had headed the War Industries Board in World War I. This meeting solidified Roosevelt's understanding of the immense industrial challenge ahead. It led directly to a critical decision: the appointment of William S. Ayres Knudsen to lead America's industrial mobilization effort. Knudsen, a Danish immigrant, epitomized the practical, hands-on problem-solving that would define America's industrial might. He arrived in New York in February 1900 with just $30 in his pocket. An early insult upon his arrival, square-headed Swede, he claimed, made him never stop hurrying. His journey began in shipyards, reaming hulls in steel plate for Navy torpedo boats for 17.5 cents a day. In 1902, he found work at Kime Mills, building bicycles, where he learned the fundamentals of machine tools and steelmaking. His mentor, William H. Smith, instilled in him the dignity of work and the understanding of manufacturing as wealth creation. This immigrant story, however, subtly challenges the myth of singular genius in America's industrial success. Henry Ford's innovation of the assembly line was groundbreaking, but it was individuals like Knudsen who understood its practical, large-scale implementation. Knudsen believed that the less complex parts were, the easier they were to make. The easier to make, the less the cost, the greater the demand. He, alongside architect Albert Kahn, pioneered the idea of designing factories around the machinery layout rather than the other way around. By 1911, Ford bought Kime Mills, bringing Knudsen into his burgeoning empire. Under Knudsen's production management, Ford sales soared from $90 million to over $680. By 1916, Ford operated 28 branch factories, many developed by Knudsen. By the time Knudsen left Ford, automobile production had increased tenfold, with Ford producing 2 out of every 3 cars. Yet, a rigid adherence to methods, like Henry Ford's insistence on a single color, black for the Model T, created ideological differences. Knudsen saw limitations where Ford saw sufficiency. His departure from Ford in April 1921 opened the door for a pivotal role at General Motors. In 1908, the first Model T rolled out. The same year, Billy Durant founded General Motors. Durant's initial spree of acquisitions, Cadillac for $4.75 million cash, Chevrolet, Fisher Body, AC spark plugs, Saginaw steering gear, and Frigidaire created a sprawling, disorganized behemoth. By 1920, an economic downdraft impacted the auto industry. GM stock plummeted from $100 a share in 1919 to just $14 by November 1920. Durant was bought out. Alfred P. Sloan became executive vice president, tasked with revitalizing a near-collapsed enterprise. Sloan needed a leader with a proven ability to streamline production and manage complex operations. He offered Knudsen a salary of $50,000 a year, a significant bet on Knudsen's abilities, and effectively promised him anything you like. Knudsen joined General Motors in February 1922. Chevrolet, one of Durant's acquisitions, was then GM's problem child. It lost more than $8 million in 1921 alone, the equivalent of nearly $140, numbered its shutdown, but Sloan believed in Chevrolet's potential. He saw an opportunity to challenge Ford. Knudsen, known for his work ethic, often wore his hat in his Flint office, always on his feet, hurrying to plants. His management philosophy had evolved. From his mentor Bill Smith, he learned to lead, not drive. This fundamentally shifted Knudsen's approach. It enabled him to foster a more productive and honest work environment. He revolutionized Chevrolet's production stages, from castings, forgings, and stampings, through machining and assembly to finishing and painting. His material orders were placed 6 to 9 months ahead. Precision was measured to the hundredth of an inch, achievable only by machines. The impact was immediate and dramatic. In 1922, Chevrolet sales jumped from 72,000 to almost 250,000 cars and trucks. The division swung from an $8.20 million loss to an $11.20 million net income. At a 1924 dealer meeting, Knudsen, delivering his first public speech in English, declared "One for one." It was a simple, powerful rally cry, an open challenge to Ford's dominance. By 1926, the Chevrolet to Model T sales ratio had been slashed from 13 to 1 to just 2 to 1. Knudsen's second revolution was flexible mass production. It enabled constant modification and change through the introduction of annual models, a concept that would transform the auto industry. By 1927, Chevrolet sold over 1 million cars, forcing Henry Ford to abandon the Model T entirely. The 1929 Chevrolet, with its 6-cylinder engine, a first for a low-priced car, sold 1.3 million units. Sloan's goal for customers was clear. "We want to make you dissatisfied with your current car, so you will buy a new one." This strategy, pioneered by Knudsen, accelerated the cult of the newer and embedded it in the industrial economy. The success of Chevrolet under Knudsen was instrumental in making General Motors the world's largest industrial corporation. This period also saw the ascent of another audacious American entrepreneur, Henry Kaiser. Born to a German immigrant shoemaker, Franz Kaiser, Henry began his career far from industry. He ran a chain of retail camera stores in Florida, a venture that failed. His marriage conditions were challenging. He needed to provide a home, save $1,000, and earn $125 a month. In July 1906, he journeyed west by train to a booming Spokane, Washington, which had tripled in population to 100,000 in a decade. He found work at McGowan Brothers Hardware for $7 a week, eventually becoming city sales manager, earning $250 a month. But Kaiser was restless, curious, and a rule-bender. He left McGowan Brothers earning nearly $8,000 a year as a road contractor. In 1913, personal tragedy struck. He was fired, faced financial ruin, and suffered the loss of a stillborn daughter. This forced his hand. Road construction demanded very little capital, a critical advantage for a man facing financial ruin. Kaiser's path to becoming a titan of industry was fueled by an audacious spirit and an unparalleled ability to leverage government contracts. He needed a $25,000 loan to start his own road construction business. Banker Sir William Mackenzie's brief note authorizing the loan transformed Kaiser from an applicant into an owner. He partnered with or competed against Warren Brothers, pioneers of all-weather, bitulithic road paving. Between 1916 and 1921, Kaiser Paving built approximately 80 miles of highway in Washington state and a similar amount in Oregon. Crucially, the U.S. Highway Bill of 1916 created a massive influx of federal funding, positioning Kaiser to capitalize on a burgeoning national highway system. World War I, however, had a disruptive impact. The name Kaiser carried negative associations. This forced a strategic retreat from Canada back to the U.S., realignment with federal projects. His audacious pursuit of contracts was cemented by a daring act, jumping from the Shasta Limited train to secure the Reading Red Bluff Highway contract. At $527,000, it was his largest at the time, solidifying his presence in California. His management style was revolutionary. One employee described his ability to extract information as a suction pump. Kaiser managed obliquely, through questioning rather than commanding, fostering shared ownership. He was an innovator, insisting on installing diesel engines in Caterpillar tractors, even replacing factory-installed gasoline engines. He championed simple improvements like rubber tires on wheelbarrows, boosting worker morale and efficiency. He even lobbied for California's first state gasoline tax to fund new roads. His company took on increasingly massive projects, including a $19 million Cuba road contract, which necessitated building 500 bridges through jungle terrain. The Great Depression, while crippling private enterprise, presented a paradoxical opportunity. Government contracts, like the Hoover Dam project, offered stability and long-term security. The sheer magnitude of the Hoover Dam project, 4.5 million cubic yards of concrete, 19 million pounds of steel, necessitated unprecedented collaboration. Kaiser helped form the 6 companies, a consortium including Bechtel and Morrison Knudsen, to pool resources and expertise. Hoover Dam became the first major project to mandate steel helmets for worker safety. Yet, its human cost was grim, 96 fatalities. But for thousands, it offered employment during the darkest days of the Depression. Kaiser clashed ideologically with Interior Secretary Harold Ickes, the old curmudgeon, over labor and safety. Kaiser countered with public relations, publishing the pamphlet, So Hoover Was Built, to defend against contract violations. The dam was completed ahead of schedule and $4 million under budget. President Roosevelt praised it as an engineering victory of the First Order. From there, Kaiser and the 6 companies pursued more mega projects. Bonneville Dam and Grand Coulee Dam. It was at Grand Coulee that Kaiser implemented competitive teams within his own company to boost efficiency. And it was on site, at a remote dam, that the on-site physician Dr. Diam Sidney Garfield suggested a pioneering private health insurance plan. This became the Kaiser Health Plan, a benchmark for private sector employee benefits, demonstrating the powerful link between employee well-being and business success. The year 1939. In New York, the World's Fair opened its gates. Its theme, The World of Tomorrow, epitomized American ingenuity and a projected future of peace and prosperity. The fair, spanning 1,262 acres, drew 44 million visitors. Its centerpiece was the General Motors Pavilion. Inside, the Futurama exhibit, designed by Norman Bell Geddes, envisioned a car-centric city of 1960. Its advanced synchronized audio system, the Polyrita, was a technological marvel of its time. But this glittering facade masked a darkening global reality. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. World War II had begun in Europe. The fair's optimistic narrative shattered. Pavilions like the Soviet Union's, positioned across from the Court of Peace, and Mussolini's gaudy Italian exhibit suddenly seemed grotesquely out of place. The aviation building, initially showcasing the latest flying marvels without warplanes, now stood in stark contrast to the escalating conflict. When the fair reopened on April 30, 1940, a somber mood prevailed. A Westinghouse micro-blitzkrieg exhibit symbolically acknowledged the war. The war's reach was deeply personal for Bill Knudsen. On April 9, 1940, German troops invaded and occupied Denmark, his homeland. This stark reality directly confronted him. Then, on May 28, 1940, following Belgium's surrender, President Roosevelt placed a fateful call to Knudsen. He was being drafted for national defense. 2 days later, Knudsen met Roosevelt at the White House. America's industrial base was woefully unprepared. Prior to May 1940, the USHEA, the USWWII, government had spent only $1.30 billion on new armaments over 7 years. It had procured a mere 5,640 new planes and 1,700 anti-aircraft guns. U.S. steel mills in 1939 produced only 28 million long tons of steel, less than half of 1929 production. America's merchant shipbuilding produced only 4 ships a month. The United States faced a monumental challenge. Unlike Germany, Great Britain, and Japan, who had been mobilizing for war for years, outspending the US of more for years, 10-1, America's military possessed an industrial mobilization plan that was just 18 pages long. First drawn up in 1922, it was dangerously outdated. Its reliance on a simplistic M-Day, or Mobilization Day, fantasy ignored the crucial lead time and complex conversion processes required for mass production of war materiel. The notion that America could instantly switch to a war footing was a myth. The munitions industry, crippled by past government actions like the Nye investigations and prohibitive tax laws, had to be restarted almost from scratch. Even basic compounds like gunpowder needed to be manufactured from virtually nothing. Business leaders, many with international ties, were opposed to war. Ardent liberals feared rearmament would benefit big business at the expense of labor and the New Deal agenda. This created significant internal friction. Knudsen, the production genius from General Motors, was appointed to head the National Defense Advisory Commission. His direct engagement with military leaders quickly revealed their lack of concrete plans and precise figures for procurement. He concluded that American business, not military planners, would have to define what it could produce. Knudsen understood that America's true advantage lay in its mass production principles. Breaking down complex items into interchangeable parts on an assembly line could achieve speed, accuracy, and cost reduction. This was a stark contrast to the military's understanding. General Marshall, for instance, feared fighting a war with chronic shortages and trainees using wooden guns. Dusing swiftly identified and recruited key figures. John D. Fide Biggers, president of Libby Owens Glass, became his personal deputy. Harold Vance of Studebaker was tasked with machine tools and artillery. Earl Johnson, known as Powder Johnson, took charge of explosives and small arms. Bill Harrison of AT&T oversaw communications. This core of $1-a-year men marked the practical beginnings of organized mobilization. Early wartime orders from Britain and France, totaling $350 million in 1938, including $84 million in aircraft engines alone, served as a crucial spark. They signaled the revitalization of American industry after the Great Depression. They provided an initial testbed for production that would prove vital. This rearmament effort, fueled by Allied purchasing power, was not merely an act of foreign aid. It was a critical catalyst for reviving the American economy. It laid the groundwork for America's own wartime production capabilities. The looming threat of Nazi Germany and the subsequent declaration of war prompted Britain and France to seek advanced weaponry and aircraft from the United States. Initially, the U.S. Neutrality Act hindered direct arms sales, but its modification in November 1939 to allow cash-and-carry sales removed a key barrier. Belligerents could now purchase goods if they paid cash and transported them themselves. This created a vital market for American industry. The strategic pooling of British and French orders significantly amplified demand, overwhelming American manufacturers. It forced a rapid expansion of production. By early 1940, orders surged for over 8,000 planes, then 13,000, while the U.S. Shones, Army and Navy combined, could barely order 5,000. British and French orders injected hundreds of millions of dollars into American factories. They spurred the production of machine tools, the heart of the industrial process. These investments helped revive American steel mills. They also spurred production of aircraft. Lockheed Hudson bombers, Martin Maryland attack planes, and Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters were ordered in the hundreds and thousands. The desperate situation following the Dunkirk evacuation in May-June 1940 marked a critical juncture. Britain confessed to having fewer than 17 tanks left. The US responded by supplying surplus weapons. 500,000 old Springfield rifles, 80,000 World War I machine guns, 975 guns, and 130 million rounds of ammunition. This became a lifeline, with 600 freight cars unloading at Army docks in Raritan, New Jersey, in June 1940. 1,000 men worked around the clock to prepare the first major transfer. On June 13th, the freighter Eastern Prince sailed for Britain, carrying $36 million worth of weapons. By the summer of 1940, increasing British demand for war material, particularly aircraft and tanks, forced the USA to confront the reality of dual transatlantic supply needs. It necessitated radical changes in industrial policy. Pre-war legislation restricted profits on government contracts over $25,000 to just 8%. Amortization for defense investments was set at 16 years, compared to Hitler's 7-year rule. These policies hindered rapid retooling. Knudsen pressed for pragmatism. When asked by President Roosevelt for statistics, Knudsen famously retorted, "Mr. President, do you want statistics, or do you want guns?" He adopted the British practice of a letter of intent, allowing advance funding based on intent alone, bypassing slow competitive bidding. A monumental shift occurred in August 1940. The agreement on the M3 medium tank, with Britain needing 1,000 per month, led to the direct involvement of the American automotive industry. K.T. Keller at Chrysler, despite never having seen a tank, agreed to build up to 500 a month. Ground was broken for the Detroit Arsenal tank plant. Chrysler engineers, led by Ed Hunt, redesigned fundamental components. They challenged the Army's reliance on rivets, which firing tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground in December 1941 revealed could loosen and become deadly projectiles. Instead, they embraced welding. The existential threat to Britain, particularly the loss of planes in France and German air superiority, created a desperate need for American industrial support, especially for Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. These 12-cylinder inline engines gave the Spitfire a crucial edge over German fighters, but Henry Ford, driven by his isolationist stance and personal animosity towards Roosevelt, adamantly refused to produce them. He obstructed this crucial production, highlighting the clash between individual beliefs and national necessity. Knudsen turned to Packard Motor Car Company. Chairman Alvan Macaulay and Chief Engineer Jesse Vincent secured the contract to build the Merlin engine. Packard's mass production approach allowed for a tolerance level of 1/10,000th of an inch, producing parts 3 times faster than handmade British counterparts. Packard was contracted to build 9,000 Merlins. They ultimately built over 55,000. Despite this monumental achievement, Packard's profit for the entire deal was barely $6,000. The existing government financing models were inadequate for the scale of war production. Fears of retooling costs for businesses were high. This necessitated the creation of the cost-plus contract system. By October 1940 years of cost-plus contract, the War Department had put up over $7 billion, and the Navy Department $2 billion in advance payments for war work. This radical departure from pre-war fiscal policy unlocked private sector investment in defense. It also foreshadowed the military-industrial complex that would define the Cold War era. On October 15, 1940, Bill Knudsen made a direct public appeal to the automobile show. "I want you to build bombers." This galvanized industry leaders. It set a new course for war production. America's machine gun production, projected to be 100 a day, 2 years from today, was projected to jump 9-fold due to the auto industry's involvement. The U.S. Army was about to expand from 250,000 to over 1 million soldiers. By August 1941, a critical technological transfer occurred. British scientists and engineers arrived in the U.S. They brought crucial technologies, proximity fuses, advanced gun turrets, and the cavity magnetron, the heart of a device the Brits called RDF, but the Americans called radar. Early concepts of jet propulsion were also shared. This signified a critical partnership between British innovation and American industrial capacity. The knowledge of uranium-235's potential for a nuclear chain reaction was also becoming clear, laying the groundwork for the Manhattan Project. The transformation of American industry from civilian to wartime production was complex, not spontaneous. It was driven by strategic necessity and pragmatic leadership. The automotive industry's role in aircraft manufacturing and the dramatic expansion of shipbuilding were multifaceted processes. The immense needs of the Allied war effort, specifically Britain's urgent demand for ships and aircraft, acted as the primary catalyst. Aircraft manufacturing posed unique challenges: the complexity of parts, rapid specification changes, and the need for specialized flexible soft dies rather than hard cast dies. A twin-engine bomber, the B-25 Mitchell, required 165,000 parts and 150,000 rivets, vastly exceeding the complexity of automobiles. In the autumn of 1940, auto executives met with Air Corps officers, including Jimmy Doolittle. They demonstrated the feasibility of industrial collaboration for aircraft parts. Edwin Briggs, owner of Briggs Manufacturing, pioneered adapting car body panel presses for airplane surfaces. This led to the formation of the Automotive Committee for Air Defense. More than a year before Pearl Harbor, the annual model changes for automobiles were suspended, a concrete commitment to war production. Walter Reuther, president of the United Auto Workers, proposed his Reuther plan for mass production of entire planes. However, Knudson's more practical by the NDAC. Britain's merchant fleet was in critical condition. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships 3 times faster than they could be replaced. Britain had lost 4 million tons of shipping. They desperately needed 60 new freighters. Traditional shipbuilding yards, the Big Five, were already fully committed to Navy orders, including 92 combat ships, 292 combat ships, and 12 35,000-ton Essex-class aircraft carriers. Admiral Emery Land, Knudson's point man on shipbuilding, faced an impossible task, but Henry Kaiser, the audacious entrepreneur, stepped forward. He dramatically responded to the British freighter contract by proposing the construction of 2 new shipyards from scratch at Richmond, California, on barren mudflats. His team, including Clay Bedford, built these yards in a mere 3 weeks. The Liberty ship program began, with its utilitarian seagoing boxcar design focused on cargo, not comfort. Its design, with straight lines for welding and 7,500 components from 600 subcontractors, was built for speed. Liberty ships were expected to be completed in less than 3 months, compared to 10 to 11 months for traditional freighters. The financial strain on Britain was dire. By June 1, 1941, Britain was projected to owe the US $3 billion. This led directly to the conceptualization of Lend-Lease. President Roosevelt explained it in a December 17, 1940, press conference. It was a strategic shift, enabling sustained Allied resistance without bankrupting key allies. This period witnessed the monumental struggle to overcome America's unpreparedness. The Office of Production Management, or OPM, was established, with Bill Knudson at its head. President Roosevelt, on December 29, 1940, delivered his famous Arsenal of Democracy radio address. He publicly framed the U.S. heirs. He publicly framed the U.S. designs. Role. He galvanized the nation towards wartime production, but the path was fraught with challenges. Roosevelt's political imperative to include labor leadership, Sidney Hillman, alongside industrial leadership, Knudson, in the OPM, created immediate friction. The scale of the undertaking was immense. Stacey May, the OPM's numbers man, began compiling the Big Book. It was the first comprehensive assessment of Allied war material needs and U.S. of Freed's production potential. Its initial figure of $50 billion for the Allied war effort was deemed a fantasy, potentially tripling to $150 billion. Labor unrest proved a significant obstacle. In early 1941, a wave of strikes swept the nation. 4 million labor hours were lost at the Alice-Chalmers plant due to an 8-week strike. John L. L's He strike. John L. L's bid Lewis, head of the United Mine Workers, threatened a strike of 400,000 miners. The North American aircraft plant strike dragged into June. By August 6, 1941, 16,000 CIO shipyard workers struck at federal shipbuilding. In total, 3,500 strikes occurred in 1941, costing 23 million man-days of labor. This exposed labor as a major impediment to rapid war production. Bureaucratic inefficiencies also plagued the effort. A fragmented and often conflicting system of agencies struggled to manage priorities and allocate resources. President Roosevelt's tendency to postpone difficult decisions allowed strikes to fester, hindering mobilization. The sinking of the SS Robin Moore by a German U-boat on May 21, 1941, within the U.S. security zone, finally broke Roosevelt's lethargy. On May 27, he declared a national emergency, signaling a more serious approach to defense. On June 22, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, altering the geopolitical landscape. Despite the internal chaos, the foundational work was being laid. Machine tool production, the heart of the industrial process, doubled from 110,000 in 1940 to 185,000 by the end of 1941. Cincinnati milling machine, for instance, produced a new machine tool every 17 minutes by 1942. America acquired a giant boring machine from Germany to bore the 16-inch guns for battleships like the Iowa, New Jersey, and Missouri. By the end of 1941, tank production, almost non-existent outside government arsenals before that year, was underway on assembly lines at Baldwin Locomotive, Chrysler, American Car Foundry, and American Locomotive. Plane production reached 1,450 a month, with a goal of 2,600 by October, and an estimated 3,000 to 3,500 by 1942. Munitions output doubled in the second half of 1941, with $2 billion of munitions produced monthly. Defense spending tripled from January to July 1941, then jumped 12-fold by December. Knudsen understood the scale of the task. He estimated 18 months would be required for full industrial mobilization. By December 4, 1941, he offered an assessment of America's readiness. Just 3 days later, on December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor shattered any remaining illusions. Knudsen's prediction was nullified. The United States was suddenly, brutally, thrust into a state of total war. On January 16, 1942, William S. Knudsen would state simply, "America is in production now." This was not an announcement of a completed task, but a stark acknowledgement of a brutal reality. A reality forged through years of denial. The desperate pleas of allies, the ingenuity of immigrant industrialists, and the immense, often chaotic, power of American industry.